Hello, fourth grade. I'm so excited to be here with you virtually today to start our new book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We are going to have the perfect weather to start our book as we journey into Narnia together. For this video, you're going to need your Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe book. So if you don't have that, pause this video and go grab it and then come back and join us. And we're going to read chapter 1 together today, but before we do that, I want to talk about where this story takes place. So I have this big globe. Here we are in North America. And here's Kentucky. So here we are. This story takes place, it's before they go into the magical world of Narnia. Takes place in England during the time of World War II. And here's England. So all the way across the Atlantic Ocean in England. Same place where we're doing a lot of our history studies, the same country. This story takes place during World War II. There was a real thing that happened in England during air raids. So a lot of the bigger cities in England were getting bombed by planes, and parents would send their children to strangers to the countryside, to houses in the country, to keep them safe there. And that's where Lucy and Edmund and Peter and Susan, the four brothers and sisters in this story, they go to a professor's house, and you'll be learning about that in the first chapter as we read it. But that's a true thing that happened. Parents would send their children away to be safe. Do you remember the picture book we read yesterday about C.S. Lewis? Well, by the time you read this video, it'll be 2 days ago, or watch this video. C.S. Lewis and his brother, actually, when they grew up, they lived in the countryside together, and C.S. Lewis fought in World War I, and then in World War II, he was living in the country, and they actually brought a little girl to their house, and she discovered the wardrobe, and that's where he got this idea for this story. So, we are going to read chapter 1 together today. As I'm reading, you need to be following along in your book, reading along with me. Chapter 1, Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh because he had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet, and no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say that when I'm to go to bed. Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all better go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here." "No, there won't," said Peter. "I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes' walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There'll be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window you could see neither the mountains nor the woods nor the stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in the other. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books." Do you know what they mean by wireless in that story? A wireless is a wireless radio, so they could listen to the news and to stories on the radio, somewhat like how you would watch television or an iPad for entertainment. They listen to wireless radios. "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore in the house." Everyone agreed to this, and that is how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor. And after that was a room all hung with green and a harp in one corner. And then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony. And then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after that they looked into a room that was quite empty except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. "Nothing there," said Peter, and they all trooped out again. All except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it is very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step farther in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she could not feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, still going further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs? She thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, and went on a step or two further. Next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. "Why, it's just like branches of the trees," she exclaimed. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive. What's that word, inquisitive? That means that she is thinking hard and very, very much wondering what's going on. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could see the open doorway of the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be daylight, still daylight there. "I can always get back if anything goes wrong," thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and found it was a lamp post. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp post in the middle of a wood and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees and into the light of the lamp post. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upwards, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet, he had goat's hoofs. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first, because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler. A muffler is a scarf. He had a red woolen muffler round his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. And that's chapter 1. So let's talk about what happened for a couple of minutes. The 4 siblings, Peter, the oldest, Susan, the second oldest, Edmund, and Lucy. Lucy's the youngest. They lived in England during the time of World War II. They all went to live with a strange person, a professor, in the countryside. during World War II, during the air raids, to keep themselves safe. Now the professor, he was not married, he didn't have any children of his own. He lived with himself and 3 servants and Mrs. McCready. And the house was huge, so when they arrived there, they were really excited about, Peter thought that they'd be able to do whatever they wanted, and they were really excited about getting to go outside the next day and explore the land and all the wildlife that they imagined they would see there, but it was raining. So they explored the house instead, and what they found was mostly guest bedrooms, empty rooms, rooms with lots of books, but they found one room with a wardrobe. And Peter said, "Okay, nothing to see here," but Lucy stayed behind, and what did she do? She opened that wardrobe and went inside, and she kept going back and back and back. It's like the wardrobe never stopped. And all of a sudden, instead of feeling the fur coats on her body, she started feeling branches. And instead of feeling the wood floor, she felt the soft snow under her feet, and the snow was falling. And she saw a lamppost. So she thought, she turned around, looked back through the wardrobe. She could still see the room because she left the door to the wardrobe open. So she thought, I'm gonna go into Narnia. She doesn't know it's called Narnia yet, but I'm gonna go into this land and see what's here, because I can always go back. So she walks toward the lamppost, and then she hears a pitter-patter of feet. And who is it? It's the fawn. And that's where we stop. All right? So tomorrow you're going to retell chapter 1 to your parents, and you have a couple things on your assignment sheet. I'm so excited to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe together. We have the perfect weather for starting The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I really hope that you are as excited about this book as me. Bye.